Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my autumn Fireside Chats. And as you can see, I am at my beautiful castle location today with my fire raging in the background because we have a very, very special guest today, and that is Terry Small. Hello, Terry.
Hello, and hello to everybody who's watching.
Welcome.
Great to be here.
Absolutely.
Great to be here, Rachel.
I'm thrilled.
You're one of my favorite people. You're one of my favorite people to talk to. So
I'm
looking forward to the next
hour. We're going to have a great talk about the brain. You are over in Canada. I am over in Europe. And I'd really love you to explain to everybody a little bit, what is it that you do in your journey into the brain?
So my background is in education. I've taught everything from elementary school, high school, university, graduate level university. I have a background in psychological sciences. And as part of that journey, I became very interested in the brain's role in people's success. So what I would call applied neuroscience. So we have a lot of information that's being developed out of the field of neurology and cognitive psychology and neuroanatomy. So my real interest, Rachel, is what does that mean? What these discoveries that they're making? What implications does that have for a leader trying to implement a significant change, or a leader trying to help his or her employees, work their way through the pandemic issues that we're all facing? What does brain science have to say to a parent who's trying to get a 13-year-old to do their homework on time? Yeah. And what can our sort of topic today, what does neuroscience say about, helping students become more engaged in their learning so they can actually get more done in less time? So one of the reasons why your group will quickly pick up that I'm very, very passionate about this. And one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this topic is it's had such a profound impact on my life. I was learning all this stuff initially for me and to help me become a better learner and a better thinker. And then, I would see great results. I'm, oh my gosh, this stuff actually works. And then, like anything, I mean, if you're excited about something, you start to talk about it, whether your friends want to hear about it or not. you start talking about it. And I noticed every time I started talking about it, or I would bring in some brain science into my university classes, suddenly everybody would become attentive. I might have 100 university students in a lecture hall, and for the most part, the lessons are interesting and they're attentive. But I noticed anytime I brought up something about the brain, suddenly they would lean forward, and all the conversation stopped. They appeared to be breathing a little bit more slowly, and all the signs that you expect of increased attention density. And so I thought, well, there's people are really interested in this stuff. Mm. And then, of course, they quickly realized that this can actually help them get essentially better grades in less time, and become better learners. And so I think, when you're excited about a topic, the world finds you. I mean, I never expected to be going around the world talking about the brain and leadership and health and wellness and safety and learning and engagement and memory and reading. And it just happened out of, my love of learning.
Wow.
This is what I would tell young people that might be listening is, just become really passionate about what you do. Yeah. And the world will find you. Yeah. The world will find you. The world will. It'll beat a path to your door.
Wow. I love it. So what we're hearing is you were a teacher, and that sort of took you into finding out for yourself about the brain and about maximizing brain functions and learning. And you then were starting to trickle this into your friends, your family, and your learners. And that was the start of this amazing journey where now you are speaking worldwide to all different types of people about the brain. Am I right?
I think well summarized. I think, if I was to pick a tipping point, I was working after having spent, a lot of time and then this was the really early stages. We didn't have a lot of imaging technology, so a lot of it was guesswork about the brain. I mean, one of the things that has been so exciting for me is to see how the technology has evolved over the last 30 years, so that, we can now actually look inside the brain in real time and see what learning actually looks like physiologically. Yeah. But at the time, this was all still pretty nascent stuff. But it was interesting, and it was very, very practical. And I was working at a high school at the time, and I was working with very, very high-risk students. And the results were these were the students that nobody thought would succeed. These were the ones that pretty much, the professionals had said, okay, this is kind of your last stop, which is, like my classroom. And so I'd have these students for a semester, and the results were phenomenal. Within a couple of months, the majority of them were on the honor roll. Many of them have gone on to now, as adults, establish businesses and become parliamentarians and lawyers and doctors. And
wow.
And it just really, it was a lot of fun, but also it just really struck me that, there's just so much benefit that, I can think of very few things that would benefit somebody's life more than studying how they think. Right. And to realize that they don't have to listen to everything the little voice inside their head says. Mm. And that most people's lives don't go in a straight line. And maybe sometimes a particular situation isn't the right fit for a particular learner, but we could try something else. And we build up confidence, and we change the focus of the mind's eye. And when that happens, remarkable things can follow.
Well, I'd love to just acknowledge you, because I think you must have really helped those students who were labeled as maybe no-goers, and you really turned that around. And we know that every brain is different. We know that the educational systems that we have, more and more, the kids and the students are falling by the wayside because we do not fit in the boxes. What do you think about that?
Well said. Brains are as different as snowflakes. And so, to approach learning from a position of neurodiversity is a really foundational step. Yeah. Since you use the word labels, Rachel, I try not to use labels. Labels to me are the end result of a brain that kind of got tired of thinking. We use labels for many reasons, but really what they are, in my opinion, for the most part, are cognitive shortcuts. Yeah. And so if we can label something, we don't have to think too hard about it. Mm. And so I understand that in some organizations, labels have legal implications, and funding is sometimes attached to labels and so forth. So I get all of that, but I am very reticent to use labels, because everybody's different. And I think sometimes we use labels as a way of just kind of putting people in a box, and now we can get on with the rest of our day, and we don't have to think so deeply about it.
And also the social pain that is causing.
Yeah, for anybody that has never read Howard Gardner's seminal work, Frames of Mind, Howard Gardner, of course, the late Howard Gardner, is the person who sort of pushed multiple intelligences into the educational conversation. Yes. And one of the things that Howard Gardner talks about, which I think is just so important to always keep in mind, he says that so often, these things are really, if we call somebody a slow learner, that in many ways is kind of a cultural bias. Mm. And I remember the example that he uses, I think in the first chapter of his book. He talks about how the intelligences that we value in for example, the schools in Canada, in much of the Western world, are mathematical intelligence, linguistic intelligence, and intrapersonal intelligence, because Those are the kids that can kind of sit still for long periods of time and they don't annoy the teacher. He said that in other cultures, for example, those intelligences aren't as valuable. Some cultures value kinesthetic intelligence and spatial intelligence. Yeah. And those kids would be considered the advanced talented learners. Yeah. So if we were to take their talented group and our talented group and swap them around, they would essentially become slow learners. Right. So to me, they're learners.
Absolutely. And would you say, I mean, I always think that it's really our role as the educator to discover how that learner or that group of learners are going to learn. That's the discovery process.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, and so if, the challenge, of course, is, you know, if you have 12 learners in front of you, as many language teachers do, if you have a group of, you know, you will have a whole variety. And so this is where I think applied neuroscience comes in, because if we can kind of operate in such a way that we're using multiple approaches to learning and teaching, then every student in the group is going to find some way to kind of get a grappling hook into what's going on.
Yeah.
And so, you know, teachers are busy. We're so incredibly busy. And sometimes the tyranny of the urgent can crowd out what's important. And so I think it's so important to keep in mind that people do learn differently. And so if we have a variety of ways that we're going about it, it gives every student an opportunity to, and I think it's a good conversation to have at the beginning of the year too. If you've got a group of 10 students, say, hey, look, let's just have a discussion here about how do you learn best? You know, when you're at your best, what are you doing? What does like 9 out of 10 learning look like for you? And then listen to them talk to each other. And you can put your 2 bits in. What happens so often is, you know, we're so busy, and I think back to my very, very first years of teaching. We if we're not careful, we end up teaching the way we ourselves like to learn.
That's right. Many teachers do that.
Oh, without even knowing we do it. I mean, it's hard to read the label when you're inside the bottle.
Yeah.
And so for me, because I tend to be a very reflective, visually oriented learner, like I love to read. You give me a good book and you won't see me for hours.
Yeah.
But that's not everybody. But I remember when I first started teaching as a 21-year-old young professional, my instructional style was weighted too heavily in that direction. And not enough towards maybe kinesthetic learners who have a different way of learning.
Right.
And so now when I have the honor to be in front of the group, I really try and build in lots of different techniques that give everybody a chance to learn at their best, given the limitations of group teaching, and they'll always be there.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Now, maybe just touch on this because it's a little bit of a polemic topic for the neuroscientists. Because a lot of neuroscientists do not agree that we have preferred learning styles. And in fact, I do agree with the fact that we need sensory input from all different sort of input. But I also know that I personally have a preferred learning style. I know I do. What do you think about that?
Well, it's common sense, isn't it? I mean, you know, it's. I guess I'll start by saying, to me, it's not even really a conversation worth having. It is. There's various ways of learning, and the more inputs we have into the brain, the better. It's just going to make for better learning. So, you know, if there's lots of discussion around learning styles. I think one of the problems with learning styles, Rachel, is certain groups of people really like to, again, label. They systematize.
Yeah.
And so learning styles break down on many, many different ways. For example, some people are more sequential in their learning approach. Others are more global. Yeah. Some are better in the morning. Some are better in the afternoon. Some are better in the evening. Some prefer to see things. That's maybe their strongest learning style, and others probably more auditory, and others are more kinesthetic. I mean, really, you just have to watch people, how they go about their lives, to realize that people have preferred ways of doing things, and that includes learning. It's common sense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I will leave that to the academics to hash out. It's pretty obvious to me that the more inputs we have into the brain, the better. So, for example, I'm a very, very strong visual learner. So one of the ways that learning styles breaks down is visual. I mean, there's dozens of different ways that one can look at learning styles.
Yeah.
That said, people do like to create labels because, again, it allows people to move through things quickly without having to think too deeply about things, I think, some of the times. Yeah. So one of the third sort of ways that learning styles breaks down is visual, auditory, kinesthetic. So if you take those three letters, VAK, and you play with the combinations, as some do, you can come up with 9 learning styles. Yeah. So when I do the test, I come out as a VAK, VAK. So I'm now known as a VAK. Well, I mean, come on. Brains are way too complex for that. There's no way. I mean, it's kind of a nice starting point. And if at the end of taking a test that determines I'm a VAK, I come to realize that, hey, people learn in different ways. And just because I learn a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the best way for everybody. I think that that's a worthwhile sort of byproduct to come from that. So being a VAK, apparently I learn best by seeing, and then my second dominant modality is auditory, and then kinesthetic would be my weakest, which incidentally is how I go about my life. Like if I have to fix the lawnmower and you watched me, you'd probably see that manifestation. So the danger then is you might think, okay, well, I guess Terry should really do everything visually, but that's not necessarily best for my brain. Because if you push me into my weaker areas and give me a chance to play with things and use more of my kinesthetic intelligence, that will get stronger. Brains get good at what they do. This is the gift of neuroplasticity.
Absolutely.
And so, I think it's a great discussion to have with students. At the same time, it's like, you got to live in the real world.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be times where you have to listen. Because if you don't learn to listen deeply, your life is going to be hard.
Yeah.
It's going to be really hard. So, somebody might be a KVA, which means auditory is their weakest. And we all know people like that. They can't listen to save their lives. But interestingly enough, we know that if you spend more time listening and you practice listening deeply, your brain will become better at it. Yeah. So to summarize my thinking on this, and this is how I approach my teaching, I think that it's kind of one of my principles. I'm very much about principles. And one of my principles is the more active we are as learners, the more likely we are to learn and remember.
Absolutely.
So by that, I would encourage students, now that you know that principle is active learning is better than passive learning. Yeah. So when you're in a learning situation, is there anything you can do to create more movement, more hearing, more sound? And if you can kind of open up those pathways to your brain, maybe you might even want to have some peppermint sitting on the desk and just add a little bit of olfactory stimulation to your brain while you're learning. You might want to play a little bit of sort of, 55 to 70 beat Baroque music softly in the background to add a little bit of extra activity. So for me, the conversation about learning styles is in my mind an academic one. I tend to approach things in a very pragmatic, common sense way. And, it's better if you move more when you learn. It's better if you hear more. It's better if you see more. And so that kind of, regardless of whatever your learning style might be, that is going to give you an opportunity to have more fun with your learning and be more active. And, I ask students, when I do live sessions for parents and students where they come and sit together in a gymnasium. So I will sometimes have, 200 or 300 parents and students all sitting together in a gym for an hour and a half. And we're talking about studying smarter, not harder. And one of the things that comes up is I say, well, who plays sports in here? So a kid puts up a hand, and so what do you play? Oh, I play basketball. I say, okay, so would you learn more about basketball by watching people play basketball or actually playing basketball yourself? Well, of course, playing basketball myself. And it's not that watching people play basketball is a bad idea. I mean, especially if you're watching a really good team, you'll learn some stuff, you'll learn some strategy, you'll see some cool moves that particular players make. And so you are going to learn. But there's nothing like actually getting out there and being more active and taking a more active approach to learning. So then we turn it around into a classroom, for example, situation and say, well, is it going to be better for you to just kind of sit there and read a book, or is it going to be better for you to sit there and read a book and take some notes while you're reading? Okay, is it going to be better if you sit there and take notes, or sit there and take notes and say some things out loud while you're doing this? Well, obviously the latter. Well, now, would it be better if you did that lying down on the carpet, or would it be better sitting up straight in a chair? Well, sitting up straight in a chair is more active. Well, would it be better sitting in a chair or standing up? Well, standing up. Now, can you think of a way where you could do all of this while you're walking? And so if we have that as a principle, Rachel, then honestly, people don't need, people like you and me. They'll come up with 1,000 ways of doing this on their own. Absolutely. So I'm very much about principles. I always like to tell people the power is in the principle. When we know what the principle is, the ideas, the tips, the strategies, we'll come up with dozens of them. Yeah. And obviously in the sessions that I do help people come up with them. But the reality of it is, it's the principle that needs to be firmly kept in mind. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you a good example of that if I'm not making sense. So I do talks on leadership in the brain. And one of the things I will ask a group of business people, for example, or a group of school administrators or teachers, I'll say, so have you ever been talking to somebody? It's an important conversation. And right in the middle of you're saying something, and they check a text message, or the phone rings and they actually answer, and you see dozens of world-class eye rolls in the audience because everybody's been there. I say, what's the message that that you receive when somebody does that? Well, does your sense of importance go up or down? Well, obviously down. So, in my day, we used to call this common sense. If you're talking to somebody, don't look at your phone, or don't start a conversation over here. Now, apparently, this is being taught in business schools around the world in first-year leadership classes. So a really simple tip or strategy, which apparently we have to teach now, is when you're talking to somebody, put your phone away. Don't look at it. Don't even have it on the desk. If your phone is anywhere in your peripheral vision, you're 25% less attentive. Your attention density diminishes by 25%. So that's kind of an idea. I wish we didn't have to teach people to do that, but apparently we do. Yeah. But the next point that I would really want to make with the group is, now, what is the principle behind that? What is the principle behind that? And the principle behind that is make the other person feel important. Mm-hmm. Make the other person feel important. And so when we understand that that's the principle, in addition to not looking at our phone when we're talking to somebody, we will think of dozens of other ways that we sometimes make people feel important, and sometimes things that we do to get it wrong. And so from a leadership perspective, we talk about principles of leadership, and then the ideas flow from that. It's the same thing with learning and teaching. I've come up with a whole bunch of what I call brain engagement principles. Principles that if an instructor keeps in mind, you will see the attention density in a classroom improve.
Fantastic. Wow.
I mean, we touched on this in that conference that you and I were involved with, along with some other stellar people like Curtis and Maria Laura and so forth. I've got we decided we were going to do slides, folks, so I'm going to go low tech. So there you go. It's a true teacher, right?
Yes.
So we talked about the pyramid and how there are sort of 3 points of this equilateral triangle, if you like. Mm-hmm. And so you can only have an equilateral triangle if you have 3 sides, then they all have to be equal. And so one side represents content. It's the stuff that, that we're going to teach. I mean, you have to have good content, stuff that is deemed, important, and we need to learn this, and good materials and good workbooks and all that stuff. So we got content, but we also have to have good brain-based strategies for connecting the content to the learners.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third one is what I call brain state. And that's really my focus because, the people that are listening, I mean, you're the content experts. Number one, I don't know what you teach. And even if I did, I don't know much about it. So I don't have a whole lot to say about the content that you teach. You're the experts, and you do that incredibly well. I happen to know an awful lot about brain states. Think of brain state as the weather in your brain. And so my belief is that as educators, if we don't connect good content to learners in the right brain state with a good brain-based strategy, the Teflon factor will be very, very high. Very high. Yeah. And by the way, if anybody's ever wondering why teaching is such a tiring, demanding profession, it's because of the dynamic of this triangle. Because think of this as a pyramid with 3 legs that hit the floor. Mm-hmm. So not only do we have a triangle that forms an equilateral triangle at the bottom, all of the legs of this pyramid are the same length. Now we have a perfect structure. But of course, Monday hasn't started yet. So it's only perfect until the alarm clock goes off. And then, what was it Woody Allen said? The week is just one damn thing after another. And so if you think about an animated tripod where the legs are continually shifting their length, but not only that, the base of the triangle is animated and it's always moving. Yep. So you might have great content, but the learners are in a terrible brain state. They're bored. Yep. They're not paying attention. Or you might have learners that are in a really high elevated brain state. They're eager to learn. You got great content, but I shouldn't have picked groups. Groups were a bad idea for this. Or maybe I should have used worksheets, or maybe I shouldn't have used worksheets, or maybe we should have gone outside. And so this is why you get paid top dollar to be a teacher, is because you are continually having to work with this dynamic, because as soon as you get everything perfectly, you got great content, the learners are in the right brain state, and you've got a brilliant strategy, and something will shift. Teacher, in addition to all the other things we're doing, we're continually trying to keep this tripod in shape.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm making sense, Rachel, but that's
yeah.
And so my role in working with educators when they ask me to go in is to talk about brain state.
Yeah.
They're the context experts, and then together in a workshop we come up with strategies to connect the two.
Absolutely. I always think about perfect learning state. That's what I call it. When we've really got it right, then we hit the perfect learning state with our learners. Mm-hmm. And if you've got the perfect learning, that's it. It sticks.
Yeah, and the key word is state.
Yep.
State, strategy, content. That's really what it comes down to.
Yes.
That's my whole teaching pedagogy. State, strategy, content, whether we call it learning state, brain state, student state, teacher state. And by the way, while we're on that topic, you and I, before we came on camera, we were talking about the workshop I delivered to teachers on Friday here in Vancouver. That was a big part of the workshop that I did, was on how important it is for teachers to be in the right brain state.
Yeah.
Because if we're not in the right brain state, emotion is contagious.
That's right.
It is. It's contagious. Emotion, it flips like a virus. I mean, I shouldn't use that term in these pandemic times, but emotion is contagious. You know this. I mean, everybody watching will know this. There's some people you talk to. There's some people you talk to, and every time you talk to them, after a minute or two, you just feel great. Yeah. You don't even know why. You just feel like your brain state is, the clouds have parted, and it's just consistent. There's some people I talk to, whether it's 30 seconds or 30 minutes, whenever I leave, I'm always in a better mood. I'm always in a better
Terry, I'm hoping I'm one of those people.
And then there's other people. Sorry?
I'm hoping I'm one of those.
You are.
Good.
You definitely are. But there's also people, every time you talk to them, you know, it's like after 30 seconds, you're thinking, oh my gosh, like I'm losing my will to live. And that really comes down to brain state. Yeah. And so, you know, when you look at surveys that have been done of students so Rachel, do you remember your favorite teacher when you were in school?
I had quite a few actually through the years.
Okay,
yes.
So that's good enough. Just keep it in mind. So then the researcher said, okay, so Rachel, you named 4 teachers that were your favorite teachers in school. So I would like you to tell us why they were your favorite teachers. And then what they did with all of these thousands of students is they created a frequency of response list. And so it turns out that the majority of the reasons had to do with brain state. And number 1 on the list, by the way, of the 14,000 students that were surveyed was a sense of humor.
Wow.
They loved that. That was the number 1 reason why students chose you as their favorite teacher, as you had a good sense of humor. Now, what's interesting, though, is number 2 on the list was the teacher made me work hard. So the students aren't stupid. They're not looking for Yuck Yucks Club and an easy ride. Students like teachers that take the work and the learning seriously, but themselves lightly.
Right.
That's an example of brain state in that sort of equilateral triangle, if you like.
Yeah.
So you for teachers, I mean, and of course this becomes the biggest challenge is how do we get ourselves in the right brain state? When I do a presentation, this will be the same for you. The number 1 factor, look, the material will never let you down. The material will never let you down, Rachel. You've got great material. You're always updating it. The technology almost always works, so that, you know, that's going to be fine for the most part. If you walk out of the session, I'm guessing, and you think, you know what, that was just below my normal standards, it'll almost always be because of the weather in your brain. It had nothing to do with the students. I mean, if you've got a group of students, they'll plot on a bell curve. They're the same everywhere in the world. But the number 1 factor for me when I finish a session, if I think, boy, that was really, really good, is because I went in with a really good brain state.
Yep.
My state was good. If I walk out and I go, you know what, that wasn't that great. People seem to like it. I guess because I've done it a long time, I was able to hit the tape and it just kind of rolled automatically. But I'm going to try to forget this one fast. It's usually because I was in the wrong brain state.
Wow. Well, definitely something that we can all, I guess, observe in ourselves. And that's where we come into this question of metacognition, because, you know, what you are doing absolutely is unique, because you are helping people worldwide to come into that metacognition and to recognize, as you say, brain states, to recognize how we learn best, and to really start to understand ourselves, because we don't do this enough. And I think this is where you and I think this is our passion, to really say to everybody, hey, let's get to know our brains, and everybody to self.
And it's so practical. Like, to come back to the thing about learning styles. Again, I don't use the term learning styles because I think it's sort of a label that maybe can send people off in a tangent that isn't always productive and helpful. That said, another way learning styles might break down is movers and sitters. Some people just need to move more when they learn, and other people are better at sitting. But the fact is, everybody benefits physiological from more movement. So knowing a little bit about sort of neuroanatomy and physiology, I do these sessions, as you can tell. I'll just step back, or you can tell I'm standing up while I do this session. As soon as you stand up, you're burning 50% more calories. As soon as you stand up, you have 10% more blood flowing to your brain. So what does that mean then for people that might be listening and they're running classes? I mean, some of the people listening probably are instructing adult learners who come for language classes after they put in a 9-hour day at work. And then they've had to commute, maybe not so much these days, but normally. And so they get to your language class at 7:00 at night, and they're beat up. They're tired. They've been fighting commerce and business all day long. And now you got them from 7:00 until 9 or 10:00, and you got to teach them something about English, for example. Well, good luck, unless you've got a few tricks up your sleeve to kind of keep them in a good elevated brain state, given, the restrictions of having to deal with tired adult learners after a long day in the office.
Right. And, we come back to this, us as educators really understanding and appreciating our learners and appreciating their brain state, appreciating their life situation, appreciating whether they are under pressure, appreciating also if they go into a fight or flight when they're learning. Because so many adults, I always ask people if they like to be told what to do. As an adult, we hate being told what to do. So being in a learning situation anyway is uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it is, it's fun. It makes the learning interesting. It makes it practical. So, the whole business of standing up, what might that look like in a classroom? Well, if you, as an adult learner, your magic number is 20. If you sit for more than 20 minutes, your brain will start to downshift. You're in trouble. If you're teaching adult students and they're sitting for more than 20 minutes, you're in trouble. Now, you're a great teacher. It's not like they're going to rebel. It's not like they're going to start a bunch of conversations, but their brains will start to wander. They'll start to drift. The brain fog will start to descend. And you will have many people in your team that you work with, Rachel, that work with children and teenagers. And so for younger learners, the magic number is age plus 2. So if you are working with 10-year-olds, the magic number to keep in mind is 12. And so if you have them sitting down for more than 12 minutes, you're in trouble. Again, it's not like they're going to start becoming unruly, but you'll start to lose that brain state that you want to maintain. And so now that we know what the principle is, what are some ways that we can make sure that 10-year-olds get on their feet every 10 or every 12 minutes, more or less?
Yeah.
Or for adults, when I do a session for adults, how can I get them on their feet every 20 minutes? Well, you'll think of dozens and dozens of ways of how to get them on their feet. It could be, I call these brain breaks. So if I'm working with a group, and let's say it's a group of adults, I will take 20 minutes. I've always got, a small collection of brains with me. So I teach the students about the brain. So students love to learn about the brain. They love to learn about the brain.
Yeah.
So, by the way, actually, here's something that will be of interest to your group. People who speak another language, even badly, on average, live 4 years longer than people who don't.
Wow.
So, if you're running a language business and you're talking to parents and you're trying to encourage, learning another language is obviously, your group knows all about the practical benefits. It'll help you in a career. It'll help you in traveling. And there's just, so we don't need to trundle down that road. That's pretty clear and evident, especially in a shrinking, globally oriented world. That said, there are physiological benefits to learning another language. And it's great at any age in life, but the earlier the better. The earlier the better.
Yeah.
It's so good for brain health. It's so good for longevity.
Well, it's
Sorry?
It's a little bit of brain.
Yeah, you cut up. It's a little bit of brain, absolutely. So for example, then you could build brain gym in. So for 20 minutes, at the 20-minute mark, you might have everybody stand up, brain break time. Just do some cross laterals for 15 seconds, which of course, as you will know, is brain gym, and then plunk yourself back down. One of the other things I like to do too, Rachel, is I like to get people in pairs. So if you're working with a group, let's say you've got 10 young learners. So they'll have, we'll have 5 dyads then. So everybody's got a partner. And so I might say it could be something as simple as, okay, I've just read this paragraph in English. So let's say that the group is in Italy, for example. So we have a group of Italian 12-year-old kids, and you just read a short passage in English. And so they say, okay, so now I've just read you this passage in English, and maybe they've got a copy of it in front of them, and they've read it out loud because auditory is good for them to say it, good to repeat it. And they say, now I want you to come up with one question that if you were the teacher, you could ask about this passage. Because I actually wrote down a question. I wonder if your question will be the same as mine. Okay, you and your partner go to a different part of the room. On your feet, you have 38 seconds to come up with a question for this passage. And so what that does is it moves the lesson forward. Yep. It's instructive. But I could have them do it in their seats. I could just simply go, hey, here's your sheet of paper. Okay, all of you sit there and come up with a question. But it's better if they get up. Now they get to talk to their partner. That's the auditory. It's only auditory if it comes out of your mouth and back through your ears. If you just hear it in your head, that's not an auditory input into the brain. It's got to come back through the ears. And so a lot of really powerful things happen there. They get a brain break. They stand up. They stretch. They've got 31 seconds. It's not like we're losing any time because they're looking at the passage. They're trying to come up with a question. And they're thinking, I wonder which question the teacher came up with. I wonder if ours is going to be a better question.
Wow.
And then when they're finished, you've got your 5 little dyads. Yep. I would just encourage them to stay standing and say, okay, what was your question? And they say the question in English. Okay, who would like to answer that question? And then the other 4 are going, can you say it again? And then you've got some cool stuff, and it's interactive, and honestly, at the end of the day, everybody's less tired.
Yes, absolutely. Well, amazing ideas, amazing input there, Terry. How do you see the future of neuroeducation?
Very positively, actually. I think that, I got in the very, very early stages when people had never, ever considered the brain. I mean, in many ways, when I go into businesses, it's like going back into education 20 years ago, because teachers, of course, have come a long way in their understanding of the brain and learning. That's the nature of the profession that we work in. I often go into businesses, and the thing is like I've gone back in a time machine. It's like, I have a brain? Well, yeah, actually you do. And here's kind of what you might want to keep in mind when you're at work. So I think it's very, very positive. I think wherever I go, teachers are incredibly receptive. Teachers have become much more knowledgeable. Whenever I talk now, it's different in different parts of the world. I would say some parts of the world are further along in their incorporation of brain science into learning.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean the education is but they are, maybe because they just have more exposure to it. And so I see it becoming increasingly part of the discussion. And the reason I say that is it's just so practical. It's practical. People buy a car, they want it to work. Like I'm looking at my printer. I want my printer to work. That's all I want. I just want it to work. I hit print, just give me a copy. Then that makes my life easy. And so if you suggest to a teacher that it's really good to get kids on their feet more often, they'll see a benefit. Like right there, instantly, they'll see a benefit. If we encourage kids to drink more water and have a water bottle at their desk, I mean, these are practical things that anybody can do. I mean, not everybody is equal in their ability to learn languages. But, most people can fill up a mug with water and have sips on it and keep their brain hydrated. 85% of people have a dehydrated brain all the time.
Wow.
Thinking is a process of electrical chemical reactions. It doesn't take place well when your brain's dehydrated. Like you've got neurons, right? So here's 2 neurons. So you got a bunch of dendrites, and every neuron has at least every neuron has one axon, and then a bunch of dendrites sprouting off. So when the axon makes a connection with the dendrite so that, memories can be either formed or activated, the axon will then connect to a dendrite, but there's a little bit of a gap. That's called a synaptic gap. It's filled with neurochemicals. And the major building block of neurochemicals is water. And so when a brain, because thinking is, there's a physical process that can be observed with thinking. There's molecules of memory and emotion that get passed from axon to dendrite when we're thinking. So there's actually a physical component to what we're doing right now. If a brain is fully hydrated, it allows this process to happen efficiently and quickly. When a brain is dehydrated, the neurochemicals have a harder time passing the messages efficiently. And so our thinking slows down, we get muddled, we become irritable. I mean, if you want to see a really good example of how critical the balance is of your neurochemicals in passing the molecules of memory and emotion across the synaptic gap, just notice what happens after 3 big glasses of red wine. There's a reason why we shouldn't be driving cars and operating heavy-duty equipment after having a half a bottle of wine.
Right.
It's because it's affected the neurochemical balance in our brain, and the messages, they're dawdling, they're kind of going sideways, they're backing up, and some people might be slurring their words, and so having water, and so students love to learn about this.
Yes. Wow.
And say that's always, when I work with groups over a period of days, as soon as everybody comes in, I say, okay, everybody on a scale of 1 to 10, how's your brain state? And we go around the room. And then I tell them as the teacher, say, well, here's where my brain state is. And so, somebody over here says, my brain state is 12 out of 10. And so, okay, so we want to talk to you. So how come your brain state is 12 out of 10? And so having these discussions then makes it easier to bring it into the classroom. So coming full circle back to your question, Rachel, the future of neuroscience, I think, is really bright because of people like you, and God bless the people that have taken the time to listen to our humble conversation. Yeah. They'll go and they'll try it and they'll share it with their family and their friends and their students, and then they'll share it with somebody. And
that's right.
Honestly, one of the challenges I get students is to go to the grocery store or the bookstore and go down the magazine rack and try and get through all of the magazines that are all shelved up and try not to see at least one picture of a brain. I mean, here, to your point, Rachel, this is just this last year, just in the last 6 months. Time magazine, The Science of Stress, I picked that up at the grocery store, and there's a brain.
Yeah.
National Geographic, Sleep, Your Brain, Body, and a Better Night's Rest. Time Magazine, Special Edition, The Science of Happiness, New Discoveries for a More Joyful Life. Time Magazine, again, The New Science of Learning, Our Amazing Brains, Putting Knowledge to Use, Learning at Every Age. Yeah. It's one of the ways we keep our brains young. The New Science of Alzheimer's, how it is, how it touches us, and hope for the future.
And I'm sure I could bring more as well.
Age of Anxiety, and on it goes.
Yes.
The Science of Memory.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the future is bright.
Absolutely. But I think you and I, the passion that we have is to live the neuroscience. So not just having it in the books, not just having it in the scientific research, but actually applying it and helping people to really live it and apply it and be what we are meant to be and maximize what we're meant to be and have in our heads. So Terry, I'm grateful to you for doing that. You're really bringing the application.
Well, no, thank you. I love talking about this. And maybe in our next session, we could look at, depending on feedback you get from people or your own thoughts, we could look at, some of the brain engagement principles and practical things that teachers can use in a classroom Zoom learning situation.
Absolutely. So let's then say to our audience, this was part 1 with Terry Small. And we will have a part 2, which will help on a much more practical side. I think today you've given some great tips as well and some great practical things to think about. But next time we will come a little bit deeper into really thinking about how we can help the teachers worldwide at the moment, because we're
in the principles. Yeah, bring new principles.
In the middle of the do we dare say we're in the middle of interesting times again. So it's going to be great for people who now are forced to come online, learners who are forced to come online, and also with that situation of fear and anxiety in the background bubbling away. Terry, may I invite you back for a part 2?
Yes, that would be a pleasure.
Fantastic.
And can I say too, one of the things about the learning about the principles is they apply to a classroom, they apply to a Zoom virtual classroom. They also apply to a student sitting alone learning in a library or at the kitchen table.
Right.
The principles are learning principles. So the context, they work in all contexts.
Right. Fantastic. Terry, thank you very much. A final word for our listeners today?
A final word for listeners is, state strategy content when they're all in alignment. Learning is more fun, it's more active, and it's just so practical. One of the things when teachers tell me that they're busy, that's a short conversation. We're finished. You say you're busy, I get it. You were busy before the pandemic happened. You had no time before the pandemic. Now, we've got all this extra technology that we have to learn. You run up to the grocery store, it takes 3 times as long. And so I guess my final word is, if you develop an interest in this, it will actually take things off your plate. It'll make your job easier. It will actually free up time. That's what I love about it. It's so practical that it just makes my whole life work better.
Fantastic. Terry, thank you so much. Where can people find you?
So it's pretty easy. If you Google Terry Small, TerrySmall, I'll be the first one that pops up, and the website is terrysmall.com. Actually, if you go to my website, something you'll find really interesting is there's something called the Brain Bulletin Archive. I send out a brain bulletin to about 35,000 people. It's just something I do for fun. It's free. And it has to do with brain health and learning and memory and reading. So the whole idea of a brain bulletin is one practical tip, fantastic tip that takes 20 seconds to read that you can use immediately in your life and share with the people you work and live with. And so I didn't used to have an archive, but I got tired of people signing up for the brain bulletin and say, can you send me the 112 that I missed? Well, no, I can't do that. So I now have an archive, so people can actually go in and they can scroll down the drop-down menu and just come up with some really great tips and ideas to use in their own lives and share with others.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Terry.
Pleasure.
We're going to close the Fireside Chat today. The castle was getting a little bit dark in the middle, so I did have to move the castle a little bit into the light. So we had a little bit of lighting fun games in the background. But thank you so much to our listeners, to our viewers. We will be putting all of Terry's contact details in the information below this video, below the podcast. And if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about neurolanguage, you can always have a look at neurolanguagecoaching.com. And to let all of you into a little secret, next year at the Neuro Heart Education Conference, Terry is going to be there too. So Terry, I'm so looking forward to that.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. So shall we say goodbye to everybody? And until part 2.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.